Have you ever noticed how, come springtime, all the gardens and parks suddenly look so pristinely white? You might think it's just for show, but what if I told you that spring whitewashing is actually a belated attempt, and the real magic truly happens in the fall? Today, we're going to uncover the true purpose behind autumn tree whitewashing, and how this simple practice can actually save your garden. And I promise by the end of this you'll look at that common white paint on tree trunks in a whole new light. Tree whitewashing isn't a modern fad dreamed up by landscape designers. It's an ancient horticultural practice, one our ancestors instinctively adopted. They observed that trees treated with a light-coloured solution fared better through winter. But what they didn't understand then were the physical processes at play within the tree's bark. And these processes, believe it or not, unfold like a thrilling drama, with the bright winter sun cast as the primary antagonist. So let's get one thing straight from the beginning. Most people believe the biggest threat to your garden in winter is harsh frost. However, that's not entirely true. Trees, particularly our native varieties, are incredibly well adapted to cold. In their dormant state, they can withstand extremely low temperatures. The true, insidious enemy isn't the frost itself, but rather drastic temperature swings. This period, from late January to early March, is especially perilous. It's a time when nights remain bitterly cold and wintry, yet the days become surprisingly bright and spring-like. And it's this very contrast that sets in motion a destructive process for the tree. Picture a bright, clear February day. The sun shines so intensely that the dark bark on the south side of a tree can warm up to 10, even 15 degrees Celsius. The bark soaks up heat, much like a dark fabric would. So, what happens then? The tree is essentially tricked. It thinks spring has truly arrived and it's time to awaken. Beneath the bark, an almost imperceptible flow of sap starts. The cambium cells, that vital living layer just under the bark, start to fill with moisture, getting ready for new growth. But the deceptive warmth of the day soon gives way. As the sun dips below the horizon, the air temperature plummets. Within an hour or two, temperatures can drop from above, freezing to -10 or even -15 degrees Celsius. What then happens to all that moisture that has permeated the bark cells? It freezes. Just think about what happens when you leave a glass bottle full of water out in freezing temperatures. The water expands as it freezes, shattering the glass. A precisely identical process, though on a microscopic scale, unfolds inside the tree. Millions of ice crystals literally burst the delicate living cells from within. This causes severe damage to the bark and cambium tissues. This destructive process is what leads to frost cracks, deep vertical fissures in the tree's trunk. And these are not merely cosmetic imperfections. They represent serious, open wounds on the tree's body, potentially leading to dire consequences. A crack like this is essentially an open wound for a tree. It's a direct, unprotected gateway for all sorts of infections. Fungal spores that cause wood rot, bacteria, and of course, insect pests. Bark beetles and other wood-boring insects will happily move into such a convenient apartment. The tree will, of course, try to heal this wound by growing specialized tissue along its edges, but this consumes enormous energy that could otherwise be used for growth and fruit production. What's more, a tree can almost never fully close a deep crack. It remains a permanent weak point throughout its entire life. As a result, the tree weakens, becomes highly vulnerable, and a slow but steady process of decay can begin within the trunk. And this is precisely where, to prevent this unfolding drama, our protagonist steps onto the scene: autumnal whitewashing. You see, that whitewash isn't just paint. It's essentially a sunscreen for trees. Just like we choose light-coloured clothing in summer to reflect sunlight and stay cool, it's the same principle for trees. The white coating on the trunk doesn't absorb the intense rays of the winter sun. Instead, it effectively reflects them. This prevents the dark bark from overheating. Even on the sunniest February day, the surface temperature of a whitewashed trunk will only be a couple of degrees warmer than the ambient air, unlike an unpainted dark trunk, which can be 10 to 15 degrees hotter. That's a huge difference. The trunk stays cool, and the tree isn't fooled. It continues its dormant state, preventing premature sap flow and keeping the bark cells from filling with damaging moisture. Consequently, it's protected from nighttime frosts. The temperature fluctuations become gradual and safe. This, then, is the main, vital purpose of autumn whitewashing, to mitigate extreme temperature swings and protect the tree from sun scald and frost cracks. There's also another common myth, that whitewashing is essential to protect trees from rodents. It's true that hares and mice can cause significant damage to the bark of young trees during winter, especially when other food is scarce, and to some extent, this claim holds true. Some manufacturers of commercial tree paints add special repellents with a bitter taste or an unpleasant smell to deter rodents. If you're mixing your own solution, you could add a small amount of carbolic acid or creolin, for instance, as their scent is also unappealing to hares. However, let's be honest, this isn't the most reliable form of protection. A truly hungry hare will likely ignore the unpleasant taste of whitewash. Therefore, relying solely on it as your primary defense against rodents is quite risky. It's much more effective to use special plastic tree guards, wrap young tree trunks with evergreen boughs, or even old nylon stockings. In this context, whitewashing serves more as a supplementary measure, certainly not the primary one. And what about pests? Does whitewashing help combat them? Here, the answer is a resounding yes. This is another significant, though secondary, benefit of the practice. Many common pests and disease pathogens overwinter in the cracks and crevices of tree bark. They deposit their eggs, larvae, and pupae there, patiently waiting for the first warmth of spring to emerge and wreak havoc on our gardens. Whitewash, especially when fortified with copper or iron sulfate, possesses fungicidal and insecticidal properties. When we thoroughly coat the trunk and the bases of the main branches, we effectively seal off and eliminate a large number of these overwintering pests. The solution seeps into even the tiniest fissures, disinfecting them. Therefore, autumn whitewashing also serves as an excellent sanitation measure, helping to significantly reduce pest populations and the risk of diseases in the upcoming season. Keep in mind, though, that this is a valuable bonus. The main goal is still to protect against drastic temperature fluctuations. Now for the most important and often most debated question: when should you actually whitewash your trees? Remember this one simple rule: you should always whitewash your trees in the autumn. That familiar sight of whitewashed trees in May, that's largely a cosmetic touch. While it certainly doesn't harm the trees, it's already too late for it to serve its primary protective function. As we've mentioned, the most critical period for trees, marked by sharp temperature fluctuations, is February and March. By May, the sun is consistently warm, and the danger of sunscald and frost cracks has largely diminished. If you didn't get around to whitewashing in the fall, by spring, any potential damage is likely already done. The correct time for autumn whitewashing is late fall, after all the leaves have fallen. The tree should be completely dormant, having entered its resting phase. But you must get it done before the onset of sustained frosts and the rainy season. You need to apply it on a dry, windless day, with temperatures above freezing, so the whitewash can dry thoroughly and adhere properly to the bark. Generally, late October and November prove to be the perfect window. Alright, so we've covered the why and when of whitewashing. Now let's tackle the equally important question: what should we use? Every gardener essentially has two options here: mix their own solution from scratch, or simply buy a ready-made commercial product. Both approaches are perfectly viable, and each has its own pros and cons. Let's start with the classic homemade recipes. These DIY solutions are most commonly based on slaked lime or horticultural chalk. These are the cheapest, most readily available, and time-tested ingredients. They create that characteristic white, reflective layer on the tree trunk. The basic recipe itself is incredibly simple. Just mix the lime or chalk with water until it reaches the consistency of thin cream or paint. However, there's one significant drawback to this simple mixture. It washes off very easily with the first autumn rains. Just a couple of heavy downpours, and all your hard work will be gone without a trace. That's why it's crucial to add binding agents to the basic recipe. These will help the whitewash adhere better and last longer on the tree trunk. To ensure our homemade whitewash doesn't wash off in the rain, we need to add a binder to the mixture. What could that be? The simplest and most eco-friendly option is clay. It adds viscosity to the mixture, helping it adhere better to the bark. For a standard bucket of whitewash, about 1 kilogram of clay is usually sufficient. Another popular additive is household or potash soap. This should be grated and then dissolved in water. Soap also helps improve adhesion. Some traditional gardeners still use wood glue or a homemade flour paste. And of course, for disinfection, it's highly advisable to add a fungicide to the mix. Most commonly, this would be copper or iron sulfate. This helps eliminate fungal spores and moss. Ultimately, a classic recipe typically involves 10 litres of water, 2 times 3 kilograms of slaked lime, 1 kilogram of clay, 300 grams of copper sulfate, and 50 grams of soap. Mix all ingredients thoroughly and it's ready to use. But what about garden centres? There, the shelves are brimming with pre-mixed tree paints. These are most often modern formulations based on acrylic or water-based emulsion paints, specifically designed for garden trees. What's their main advantage? Durability. After drying, this paint forms a strong, elastic, and very importantly, breathable film on the tree trunk. It doesn't crack or flake off like traditional lime washes, and it's capable of lasting on the trunk not just all winter, but until the following autumn. In other words, you paint it once and you're done. Furthermore, these paints typically already include all the necessary components: fungicides to protect against diseases, and sometimes even substances that repel rodents. You don't need to mix anything or worry about proportions. Just open the bucket, stir, and start working. This is incredibly convenient and a huge time saver. But, of course, this level of convenience comes at a price. Pre-mixed solutions are significantly more expensive than homemade options. However, there's a very important nuance when choosing between lime wash and modern paint, especially concerning young trees. Saplings with smooth, delicate bark require a special approach. Their bark must actively respire, facilitating crucial gas exchange. A dense layer of acrylic paint can obstruct these vital processes, essentially suffocating the bark's pores. This could hinder the young tree's growth and development. Therefore, for saplings and trees up to 3 or 4 years old, good old lime or chalk whitewash is still the better option. It's less durable, but it's more porous and permeable to air and moisture. It will protect the tender trunk from sunscald without impeding its natural development. In contrast, modern acrylic and water-based paints are perfectly suited for mature trees with their established, rough and cracked bark. They reliably seal all cracks, providing long-lasting protection and excellent sanitary benefits. One last, but equally crucial rule that's often overlooked concerns the height of whitewashing. How high up should you actually apply the paint? Many gardeners only cover about ½ a metre from the ground, thinking that's sufficient. But this is a common mistake. In winter, especially during sunrise and sunset, the sun's angle is low, meaning its rays can hit the tree's trunk surprisingly high up. The correct approach is to whitewash the entire trunk. By trunk, we mean the main stem of the tree, from the root collar, ground level, all the way up to the first lower main scaffold branch. However, it's best not to stop there. It's equally important to extend the whitewash to the bases of these major scaffold branches, covering at least 1/3 of their length. These crotches and forks are common spots where moisture accumulates. Pests often overwinter, and they are also highly susceptible to overheating and cracking. So, don't skimp on the whitewash. Thoroughly coat the entire trunk and the bases of the lower branches. This is the only way to ensure your tree receives complete and reliable winter protection. And now for the critical turning point that changes everything. We've talked about frost cracks as wounds, but what truly happens to them over time? While the tree attempts to heal these injuries in spring, complete recovery is rarely achieved. The crack becomes a persistent vulnerability, an open invitation for pathogens. Year after year, fungal spores penetrate the exposed wood, slowly but surely decaying the tree from the inside out. Externally, your tree might appear healthy, yet internally, the process of rot has already begun. 5, 7, even 10 years later, a strong wind on an ordinary day can snap an outwardly sturdy branch, or even the entire trunk. The true culprit won't be the storm itself, but that tiny crack that formed so many winters ago, simply because the trunk wasn't whitewashed in autumn. A single overlooked procedure can shave decades off a tree's lifespan. So, let's summarise. Autumn whitewashing isn't merely cosmetic, it's a vital procedure for the health of your garden. It acts as winter clothing and sunscreen for your trees, protecting them from potentially deadly sunburn and cracks. When choosing between a homemade mix and a commercial tree paint, consider the age of your trees and your budget. Both options are highly effective if applied at the right time. Thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. I hope you now have a clear understanding of how to properly care for your trees in winter. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future episodes. Now, a question for you. What do you use to whitewash your trees? Do you stick to the old-fashioned lime wash recipe, or do you trust modern tree paints? Share your experience and favourite formulas in the comments below. Let's discuss!